Bellator paid me purse-wise on the purse. They paid me more than the UFC paid me, though.
See, I always tell people there's money. Everybody's like, oh man, you got to be in the UFC. That's where all the money is. I'm like, dude, there's people who make more money outside of the UFC in other organizations, right? Like UFC has that prestige, right? You look at Kayla Harrison. She just left PFL to fight in the UFC because she's done everything in PFL.
And me, when I do my contracts, I win or lose, I get the same money. I never did this to show I get this, and if I win, I get that.
Nobody saw it coming when Rampage Jackson dropped a single line that sent shockwaves through the entire MMA scene. Within minutes, fighters were cheering, fans were arguing, and according to insiders, Dana White was storming around the UFC offices looking like he'd swallowed a grenade, because Rampage wasn't just happy about a payday, he was celebrating payback, closure, and nearly 10 years of frustration finally boiling over in front of thousands of viewers on his livestream. Rampage lifted his phone like it was a championship belt, grinning as he revealed he'd finally received his share of the massive $375 million settlement fighters have been battling for since 2014. He wasn't delivering some emotional speech. He wasn't getting political. He wasn't even trying to start drama. He was just being classic Rampage, raw, loud, and completely unfiltered. And that is what blew everything open when he joked, "My kid's gonna have a real good Christmas this year." It hit hard across the community. Fans instantly remembered all the complaints about fighter pay. Former fighters immediately thought about the money they missed out on. And Dana White, who has spent years brushing off criticism about low pay, suddenly had one of the biggest stars from the UFC's golden era pouring gasoline on a fire the UFC has tried to smother for a decade. But Rampage celebrating was just the spark. The real explosion came when people started breaking down what the settlement actually represents. This wasn't a bonus or a friendly payout. This was the result of a court case, years of evidence, and non-stop pressure forcing the UFC to finally compensate fighters who argued they were underpaid during the company's fastest growth years. Rampage flashing his check on stream instantly became the symbol of everything the UFC didn't want to discuss publicly. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for, Dana White's response. Insiders quickly reported that Dave Schaller and Hunter Campbell were scrambling to do damage control within hours. The UFC absolutely did not want one of their most charismatic former champions turning this settlement into a public celebration, and that's exactly what Rampage had just done.
I left UFC because they stole my Reebok deal. That was my motherfucking deal. The UFC and Reebok team, they'll cut me out, and they try to give me one of those fucking kits. I was like, man, you, I'm leaving, and they try to make it sound like I retired. I went to Bellator. I fought in Bellator for years, and I left them. Something happened where I owed them one more fight or something like that. I had to buy myself out of the UFC contract. I did have to pay like $1.7 million.
What's the most amount of money you made in the fight?
With pay-per-view and everything, I probably made the most money on Chuck Liddell. Millions.
Wow, see that? Getting a cut of the gate, getting a cut of the pay-per-view.
Yeah, it was. I don't want to say the number, but
you don't have to say the number.
It was over $5 million.
Wow.
Because of the pay-per-view. Me, when I do my contracts, I win or lose, I get the same money. I'm not doing this if I lose, I get half or something. No, I didn't do that shit. People come there and watch me fight, or I win or lose, I'm gonna get paid. I don't care what level and stuff you are, but I think that's disrespectful to the fighters, and it's unfair. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it should be one person.
Yeah, it's not like you work a 40-hour-week job and you show up, they're like, oh, we're gonna give you, 30 hours worth of your check. Same thing with fighting. I agree with you. There should not be a show win. There is no such thing as an incentive. I have never met somebody who's ever stepped in a cage just to show up and lose. I've never.
We both know this guy, and he keep it real about it. Bob Sapp.
Oh.
When I first made my first money, I think that's like the thing about fighters. We're more famous than we are rich. So we got more followers than we have dollars. So people are looking at us. Like, we go out with our friends, are like, oh, Bill comes, and they're looking at you like, hey, man, like, ain't you going? Like, so like, you got to really, at a young age, I saw that. Like, all right, I can't pay for every bill. I can't be the savior for everybody. I did buy my mom a house. I have my brothers out and all that, but I learned how to say no, I would say. Fighters can know how to say no. It changes you as a person.
Dana White was already dealing with a storm over fighter pay thanks to the new Paramount partnership, angry fan backlash, Ariel Helwani's criticism, and non-stop arguments about whether UFC athletes should get a revenue split similar to an FL or NBA PLA. Yours, and right in the middle of that chaos, Rampage shows up with perfect timing, reminding everyone that fighters had to fight the UFC in court for nearly a decade just to get what they believed they were owed. And this is where things hit a nerve. If there's one thing Dana White cannot stand, it's fighters exposing behind-the-scenes business. He hates when negotiations leak. He loses it when PPV point discussions go public. And nothing irritates him more than athletes openly talking about fighter pay. So watching Rampage laugh, celebrate, and openly describe how the UFC allegedly cost him money in sponsorships, merchandise deals, and outside opportunities, that's a nightmare scenario for Dana. Especially during the biggest media deal in UFC history. But Rampage didn't hit brakes. He pushed harder. He talked about the years he claimed the UFC blocked his Round 5 sponsorship. He described moments where he felt sidelined. He talked about being pressured into choices that didn't help him. And fans didn't hear bitterness, they heard relief. They heard a fighter who felt like the system had finally acknowledged what he'd been saying for years. Because whether the UFC agrees or not, Rampage became the voice of hundreds of fighters who believed they were stuck in restrictive contracts while the UFC exploded into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. And once his celebration started trending, fighters began chiming in. Some congratulated him directly, others posted cryptic emojis. A few simply wrote things like "long time coming" and "we earned this." Meanwhile, behind closed doors, reports said Dana White was livid. This was exactly what he didn't want. Fighters publicly celebrating a legal payout and reigniting the fighter pay debate at a moment when the UFC needed clean, calm PR. And the timing made it even worse. Rampage's celebration didn't happen during a quiet week. It hit at a moment when the UFC was already dealing with multiple controversies, scandals, and a growing narrative that the company was losing control of the conversation.
The only thing I've really asked for is for the minimum fighter pay, which is $12,500, to be changed to $50,000, so that if fighters who, you know, have to work multiple jobs, if they fight once a year even, they would still be able to live off of that. And if it was twice a year, they'd make $100,000, which is great. So that's been my only ask to Dana to change, and that would only cost the UFC $20 million annually. So it seems like, oh, you made $3-4 billion. Why not just give a little bit more to the fighters? It's only $20 million. That's been my biggest thing of like, make that change and I'll shut the fuck up.
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody. And he turned the deal down. I think Francis is in a place right now where he doesn't want to take a lot of risk. Feels like he's in a good position where he could fight lesser opponents and make more money. So we're gonna let him do that. We're going to release him from his contract. We're going to give up our right to match, and he can go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants.
When you went over to ONE FC, like, how do they pay over there?
They pay good.
Is it comparable to the UFC? Is it better?
Everybody's contract is different. Everybody's contract is different. I'm happy. I'm very happy where I'm getting, but everybody's totally different.
Do you
I don't like arguing, right? I don't like I remember when I fought, what was it? Like, I remember when I fought Chris Carriasso, I made, I don't know. Let's say I made $150,000, right? And then I'll fight the next challenger, Kyoji Horiguchi, I would make less money, right? And I'm like, how the fuck is this? Because you always get your show and your win. Excuse me, your show and win, right?
Right.
Your show might be $150K, and your win's $50,000 bonus. Typically it goes up by escalator of $3,000, $10,000, $15,000. It all depends, right? But then when I fought Chris Carriasso, I made, let's say $150,000. And then when I fought Kyoji Horiguchi, I made less.
So what was the holdup with the UFC? Like, what led you to not sign?
There was a lot of frustration over the years. I think since my fight against Stipe, my first fight against Stipe, my relation with the UFC had never been the same.
Really?
I felt like I wasn't in the right place. Then I get the Derek Lewis fight, who was like the worst fight, and that didn't help me at all.
You win the Cyril Gane fight. Then what happened?
I have no guarantee that signing this contract, I will not get into what I have been told in the past 3 years. So how about we change something that will make me feel secure?
And what did you want to change?
A lot of things. Well, unless he was the one writing me the check, I don't see how he can know that. Me, as the inside one that was receiving those money after leaving the UFC, and from what the UFC was proposing, who was just a trap, he wasn't a solid contract as well. That's a lie.
You think you made more money doing MMA or so far with streaming?
I've only been streaming for 8 months, and I've made more from streaming in 8 months than I did in fighting in 25 years. 100%. My stream, the clip, I guess, gets more numbers than my fights.
The longer Rampage talked, the more the conversation drifted into the most uncomfortable territory in modern MMA, the possibility that fighters weren't complaining all these years. Maybe they were telling the truth the whole time, and the truth finally caught up, because every time Rampage mentioned a sponsorship he lost, an opportunity that was blocked, or a deal he wasn't allowed to take, fans were reminded of an entire era fighters wish they could erase. The Reebok era nightmare, the period when athletes went from making six-figure sponsorship money to earning a tiny $3,000, $5,000 per fight, while the UFC's value skyrocketed. People instantly remembered Brendan Schaub saying he once made 6 figures per fight in sponsorships and then dropped to almost nothing overnight. They remembered Donald Cerrone publicly stating he lost around $80,000 each fight after the uniform deal was forced through. And they remembered all the fighters who watched their income collapse while the UFC went fully. Corporate hearing Rampage talk about it now while holding a check from a court-mandated settlement felt like confirmation. Prove that these complaints weren't exaggerations. They were legitimate financial losses so significant that a judge approved hundreds of millions in compensation. You could feel the tone shift. The memes, the jokes, the hype, it all transformed into something heavier. Because Rampage wasn't just revisiting old issues, he was pointing straight at the problems of today. And right now couldn't be a worse moment for the UFC to deal with this kind of spotlight. The new Paramount agreement is the single biggest media contract in combat sports history. Dana White proudly called it a milestone for the sport, but analysts immediately highlighted the uncomfortable truth. The UFC doubled its media revenue, and fighters didn't get a single percentage of it. That made Rampage's check even louder. Fighters who competed from 2010 to 2017 just got paid for allegedly being underpaid. Meanwhile, fighters stepping into the cage in 2025 are watching the UFC ink billion-dollar deals and asking the same question: where's our Shari in this? According to insiders, is why Dana White blew up behind the scenes when Rampage went public. The UFC is trying to roll out a global, polished, corporate image heading into a new distribution era. Rampage Jackson waving his settlement money around is the complete opposite of that image. It's raw. It's emotional. It's chaotic. It's a former champion looking into a camera and essentially saying, they should have paid us right the first time. And that single moment reignited every major fighter pay storyline of the past decade. It tied directly into Francis Ngannou walking away as heavyweight champion because he wanted freedom in his contract. It tied to John Jones saying his pay was embarrassing until he renegotiated. It connected to Demetrius Johnson claiming the UFC undervalued him even when he was one of the best fighters on the planet. It connected to Jorge Masvidal threatening to walk away until he secured a better deal. It connected to Nate Diaz refusing fights until he got paid properly. And it connected to every prelim fighter trying to survive on a paycheck that barely covers a full training camp. So while Rampage was celebrating money that symbolized justice for the past, current fighters saw something else: a blueprint, a sign that pushing back works. And Dana White saw a warning, maybe even a threat, because if fighters keep challenging the system, the UFC might one day face another lawsuit, another settlement, or a push toward mandatory revenue sharing, just like every major sports league in America already has.
Be paid like the boxers because we put it on the line. One thing I'm not a fan of is the 50-50 purse. That's my only thing.
Oh, yeah.
I want guaranteed money.
Are you on the 50-50?
We're all on 50-50, unless you're like up there.
Sure. It's antiquated.
Yeah. I'm still new in my career, right? You know, so I'm still proving who I am. But I think I've proven that, you know, I'm going to bring it and I'm going to look for the finish. You know, I'm just not a decision guy. Like, could I have kept Kelvin on the ground? Yeah, I know I could have. Could I have grabbed him? Yeah, I know I could have. But I wanted to finish, you know, and I wanted to try and get that sweet shot and really like put him out and make a statement. And, you know, I didn't, but I still dominated. But yeah, I would prefer to have guaranteed money, because I think the anxiety for me, just me personally, is just like, man, I'm fighting one of the best guys in the world. Anything can happen. But if I don't win, I only make this much.
Sure.
And that's
you deserve to.
The UFC guys are fighting without any understanding of how much revenue's in the pot. What time does the UFC fighter go, hang on a minute, how much money is in the pot here? You kind of need me, don't you? I mean, I'm the talent. Without me, do you even have a show? Yeah, maybe you can put someone else on. But I've just sold this arena out. I'm just racking you up 400,000 or 500,000 pay-per-view buys. So you imagine you said to a star in the UFC, right, it's your show. And we're going to have open book, and you're going to take 80% of the profit of the show, and we take 20%. Imagine how much the UFC fighters would be making. 5, 6, 7 times more than they're making at the moment. The UFC guys are fighting without any understanding of how much revenue's in the pot. And these guys don't care, because, and by the way, it's their business. They can do what they want. If they can get away with that model, good luck to them. But in that model where it's a league or it's a contender series and the guys are getting 50 if you win this fight and 100 and then 200, it's peanuts. How much are they getting from Paramount? You know, if it's multi-million dollars per show for the rights fee, which it probably will be, the profit is unbelievable.
Dana White would say our shows would never be like boxing events, top heavy, 1 or 2 big fights and nothing underneath. Anyone who tells you otherwise, that they are not doing that right now, is simply lying. They're very top heavy, and then the rest are up and coming, unknown, soon to be contenders, but not what they were back in 2009, 2010, 11. The biggest star in the UFC are the 3 letters. Would you not agree that when the UFC says they come to town, they could sell tickets off those 3 letters alone? I don't know if a lot of promotions that could say, we're coming to town and we're going to sell out. People need to know who's on the card. The UFC and WWE are probably the only combat sports entities right now that could do that.
So when you fight in Pride, I'm sure you're getting paid more than $10,000. Like, were they paying you guys in cash?
Yeah, they were paying us in cash. And back in those days, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I did claim taxes. You know, I did claim my taxes. But to get it in the country, I had to get creative. And so I would like give, you know, you have like 4 cornermen. So you would keep some on you, and you would dish out 9,000 to all your cornermen. But my thing was, you know, those camouflage pants that I walked out in, they had big cargo pockets on them. So I always wore those back on the airport. And being a black guy, you can get away with a lot of stuff. They never suspected me to be carrying a bunch of cash on me. So
look at this broke mother walk through here. I was surprised you could afford a goddamn ticket.
Yeah. They never suspected me to be having that much cash. So it was always cool.
As Rampage kept talking, the conversation drifted deeper into MMA's most uncomfortable truth, that maybe fighters weren't whining all these years. Maybe everything they said about lost income, blocked opportunities, and suffocating contracts was real. And now, with Rampage openly discussing how many sponsors, deals, and career-changing moments slipped through his fingers, fans were reminded of one of the darkest chapters in UFC history. The Reebok era, the time when fighters who once earned minus 1-figure sponsorship deals suddenly found themselves making barely a few $1,000s per fight, while the UFC's value exploded. People remembered Brendan Schaub admitting he used to make more in sponsors than in fight purses. They remembered Donald Cerrone saying he instantly lost around $80,000 per fight. They remembered every athlete who watched their income collapse the moment the UFC put everyone into the same uniform. But now Rampage wasn't just talking, he was holding proof. He was literally celebrating money awarded by a court, validating everything fighters had been claiming for more than a decade. Instantly, the mood online shifted. The memes, the jokes, the reactions suddenly got heavier. Because Rampage wasn't just exposing the past, he was forcing everyone to look at the present, and this current moment is brutal for the UFC. They just signed the biggest broadcasting partnership in combat sports history with Paramount, Dana. White called it a new era, but analysts pointed to one unavoidable truth. The UFC doubled its media revenue, and fighters still didn't get a percentage of it. That's why Rampage's celebration hit so hard. The fighters from 2010 to 2017 finally got paid for being allegedly underpaid. Meanwhile, Fig.